All right, well, as clashes between Israelis and Palestinians continue, the international community, such as it is urging both sides to de-escalate. Here in the United States, Palestinian supporters marched on the streets of Chicago yesterday while people holding up the Israeli flag gathered in New York City's Times Square. The U.S. is now trying to help defuse the crisis by sending a special envoy who will attempt to work out a ceasefire. President Biden also spoke to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over the phone yesterday, where President Biden condemned the rocket attacks on Israel, adding that the United States' position is that Jerusalem should be a place of peace. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now with more. So, Ed, what has been the response to the president's remarks? And what more can you tell us about this call with the Israeli Prime Minister?
Not much more than you just said. Reading from the same statement, they had this call. The president reiterated that Israel obviously has a right to defend itself. He condemned the rocket attacks from Hamas, especially those that were targeting Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And as the White House says, quote, conveyed his unwavering support for Israel's security and Israel's legitimate right to defend itself and its people while protecting civilians. The president is pushing for what the statement describes as a, quote, pathway toward restoring a sustainable calm. Not necessarily peace, but a sustainable calm. This is the second phone call we know of that the president has had with the Israeli prime minister since he took office in January. Netanyahu wasn't one of the first world leaders that this president called. It happened a little later on, and the press had noticed that it was taking a while. But that's partly to do with the fact that, of course, the Israeli government has been so unstable over the past year as they continue to hold elections that don't result in the formation of a unity government. So either way, in this statement, the White House says the president and Netanyahu will keep in touch. And several other government officials in both countries have been keeping in touch in recent days over this. The National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, among others.
Let's switch to the president's infrastructure plan. So yesterday, he met with congressional leaders, all the big muckety-mucks, but today you have told us this is the meeting that is more likely to be of greater consequence when it comes to any success. He is meeting with Republican lawmakers, but they're Republican lawmakers that are focused on the area of infrastructure. What's at stake here?
What's at stake is whether or not a bipartisan deal is possible. The 6 Republican senators coming over are bringing a $568 billion counter-proposal to the president's roughly $4 trillion set of proposals. Their argument is it should be a much more modest and tailored approach to dealing with traditional infrastructure issues, roads, rails, bridges, airports, things like that, not, as one of the Republican senators described it, as soft infrastructure like funding home health care, boosting child care, tax credits, expanding pre-K or community college to those who need it. So we'll see, as a result of this, whether they can keep talking. Republican aides tell CBS News they're going to give the White House about another week after this meeting to determine whether or not the White House is indeed serious about bipartisan talks, or they're basically just going to give up and say, well, go ahead, Democrats, go it alone because we want to do it. The big sticking point, in addition to the price and the scope, as if that wasn't enough, is exactly how to pay for it. The president, of course, pushing for increased taxes on corporations and the wealthiest of Americans. Republicans say any changes to those 2017 tax cuts and tax policy enacted by Republicans and President Trump is a non-starter for them. So you can see they face a few brick walls.
And we also know that the president is gearing up to speak in just a few hours about the Colonial pipeline shutdown and gas shortages across parts of the Southeast. What do we expect to hear from the president?
These are going to be his most extended remarks yet about this cyber attack and the economic fallout. Remember, this happened last Friday night. He was kept updated through the weekend into this week. And over the course of the last several days, we've seen several senior government officials come out and explain to the press what exactly the administration's doing. The Energy Secretary, the EPA Administrator, the Transportation Secretary, a handful of security advisors who deal with Homeland Security or cybersecurity and energy issues, to talk about how they're engaging governors and mayors and, keeping tabs on the gasoline industry and whatnot. We haven't heard extended remarks from the president. He talked a little bit about this yesterday on the tail end of a conversation about vaccines. And so I think now that the pipeline is back on, now that he has signed a new executive order, long awaited, on bolstering the nation's cybersecurity defenses, they feel that it's now time for him to come out and talk about this. What we don't yet know, and we'll learn hopefully soon, is whether he'll talk any more about the attack specifically or who the United States thinks is responsible. But he has said that the Justice Department, the FBI, will go after whoever it is and prosecute as needed.
So, Ed, speaking of that executive order yesterday that was meant to boost the nation's cyber defenses, I'm curious about the details. This is a really interesting challenge because it affects both public institutions and private businesses. Private businesses can do whatever they want. They could pay that ransomware. They don't have to alert the public that, there's been a breach. But, both areas have a similar enemy and they sort of need to team up. So can you give us a little more details about this executive order and how it might enhance this country's ability, both private and public sector, to combat these attacks?
It is designed to make that teaming up a little easier, promoting information sharing, if you will, between government agencies that track this stuff and the private companies that may get targeted. It's also designed to boost and protect government computer networks from this even more. What this is a big sort of reminder of this week is the fact that while the federal government can put in place all sorts of protections, can be tracking for these kinds of threats, can be encouraging the private sector to make sure that it's doing what it needs to do to protect itself from these kinds of attacks, it's ultimately on these private companies to pay for it and to get it done. And then to let the federal government know if something has indeed happened. And that's what was going on this week. They had informed federal authorities. They were keeping in touch. It says nothing about whether or not companies should pay ransom. The FBI in the past has advised private companies not to do it because to do it once would potentially promote more attacks and then getting other companies or other entities to pay up as well. But this week, notably, the administration didn't say one way or the other whether a ransom had been paid. The company didn't say either. There have been some reports that they weren't going to do it, but nothing has been confirmed. Either way, a lot of this in response to that SolarWinds hack last year, which was seen as the largest hack on government computers. Now this week's incident seemed to hasten getting that done because for the last several months, reporters have been asking, where is this? You said you were going to do something about it. You campaigned on this. What's the holdup? Now it's coming. And again, designed to make it a more seamless conversation between the government and private sector companies that get targeted and to make sure government computers don't get hit the way they were last year.
All right, Ed. Hopefully it makes a difference. Thank you so much, Ed.
Take care.